Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Books and Bytes. Today, we're diving deep into Peter Watts's Blindsight. It's a science fiction novel that'll leave you pondering some pretty profound questions about consciousness, alien intelligence, and what it really means to be human.
Yeah, it's not your typical alien invasion story. Watts takes us on a journey aboard the spaceship Theseus, crewed by a fascinating mix of humans and, well, a vampire. They're on a mission to investigate this mysterious alien artifact way out in the Oort cloud, a structure they call Rorschach. But what they encounter really challenges their very understanding of intelligence and reality itself.
Okay, so before we get lost in the Oort cloud, can you give us like a quick overview of the book's main themes? What are the big ideas Watts is wrestling with?
Absolutely. Blindsight is like a masterclass in exploring the nature of consciousness. Is self-awareness truly necessary for intelligence? Can something be incredibly smart and strategic without the emotions and introspection that we humans consider so fundamental? Watts throws these questions into sharp relief by contrasting Siri Keaton, the cyborg protagonist, with this unique way of processing information, and the vampire Sarasti, who seems to operate on a completely different level of awareness.
And then there's the whole question of alien intelligence, right?
Right.
I mean, we're used to seeing aliens in, movies and books, but Watts takes a completely different approach.
Exactly. He just throws out all those Hollywood tropes and asks, what if an alien intelligence is so fundamentally different from our own that we can't even recognize it as such? What if their thought processes, their communication methods, their very perception of reality is so alien that it lies completely outside our understanding? The creatures they encounter, these scramblers living within Rorschach, embody this challenge beautifully. They're just a living puzzle that forces the crew to confront the limits of their own perception.
So we've got consciousness, we've got alien intelligence, and then there's this underlying theme of human limitations.
Right. Blindsight constantly challenges our assumptions about what we can know and understand. Watts uses this phenomenon of blindsight where individuals can react to stimuli that they don't consciously perceive as a metaphor for the limitations of our senses and our cognitive biases. It makes you question whether we can ever truly grasp the full complexity of reality, especially when faced with the unknown.
It sounds like a pretty intense ride.
Yeah.
So let's start from the beginning. The story is told from the perspective of Siri Keaton, right? And can you tell us more about him?
Siri is a synthesist, which means he has these neural implants that allow him to process information in ways that normal humans just can't. He's brilliant, able to see patterns and make connections that others miss, but he also struggles with things like empathy and emotional connection. It's almost like he sacrificed a part of his humanity for the sake of this intellectual prowess.
That's fascinating. So he's a cyborg who's almost less human than a vampire.
Well, in some ways, yes. And this contrast is central to the novel's exploration of consciousness. Siri's relationship with Chelsea, for example, highlights his difficulty with intimacy and emotional expression. It's like a poignant reminder that even with all his intellectual gifts, he's still grappling with what it means to be human.
Okay, so we have Siri, our somewhat detached narrator. Who else is on board the Theseus?
Well, there's Susan James, a linguist with multiple personalities. Each of her personalities brings a different set of skills and perspectives to the table, which becomes crucial as they try to decipher the mysteries of Rorschach. Then there's Amanda Bates, the tough-as-nails military specialist. She's there to ensure the crew's safety, but her pragmatism and military mindset often clash with the scientific curiosity of the others. And of course, there's Isaac Spindell, the biologist. He's fascinated by the alien life forms they encounter, even when they turn out to be far more complex and dangerous than he initially anticipated.
Wait, did you say there's a vampire on board?
Oh, yes, of course. How could I forget Jukka Sarasti the vampire? He's the team's leader and easily the most enigmatic character in the book. He seems to possess this level of awareness and intuition that borders on the supernatural, especially when it comes to understanding the alien threat. But his motives are always shrouded in mystery.
So this is quite the crew, and they're all heading towards this alien artifact Rorschach. What exactly is Rorschach?
That's the million-dollar question. It's a massive structure, seemingly abandoned, but pulsing with this strange, inexplicable energy. The initial scan suggests that it's incredibly complex, almost like a giant living machine. It's this mystery that draws them in, promising to reveal something profound about the universe, but also carrying the potential for great danger.
Okay, so they're heading into the unknown with this motley crew and this massive, mysterious artifact looming before them. What could possibly go wrong?
Well, that's where things start to get really interesting. The crew's initial exploration of Rorschach is marked by this sense of wonder and scientific curiosity. They use probes and sensors to map the structure, trying to make sense of its design and function. But their excitement soon turns to unease as they begin to experience these strange hallucinations and encounter creatures that just defy their understanding. These scramblers, as they call them, are unlike anything they've ever seen before. They seem to be bioengineered beings, perfectly adapted for life within Rorschach, but their behavior is baffling.
And these scramblers, are they the alien intelligence you mentioned earlier?
That's the question that starts to haunt the crew. They initially dismiss the scramblers as mindless automatons, just biological tools created by a higher intelligence. But as they observe them more closely, they begin to notice patterns, behaviors that suggest something more than simple instinct. Shinsil, the biologist, becomes obsessed with understanding them, dissecting them, analyzing their strange anatomy and physiology.
Okay, so we're starting to see the layers of this onion peel back. We've got the mystery of Rorschach, the enigmatic scramblers, and this diverse crew, each with their own unique perspective on the situation. What happens next?
Well, as the crew delves deeper into Rorschach, the situation becomes increasingly tense. They encounter more scramblers, their hallucinations intensify, and the sense of danger escalates. And then tragedy strikes. Spinsiebel, during one of his experiments, has this terrifying encounter with something within Rorschach. He emerges blinded, traumatized, and ultimately succumbs to his injuries. His death throws the crew into disarray, forcing them to confront the very real risks of their mission.
So they're not just explorers anymore, they're in a fight for survival.
Exactly. And as the pressure mounts, the cracks in their unity begin to show. They manage to capture a live scrambler, but their attempts to communicate with it are met with more questions than answers. Meanwhile, the tension between Celesti and Bates reaches a boiling point, their conflicting approaches to the mission threatening to tear the team apart.
This is where Watts' skill as a writer really shines, isn't it?
Yeah.
He builds this incredible sense of suspense, dropping clues, raising questions, and keeping you constantly on edge.
Absolutely. He masterfully blends these scientific concepts with philosophical questions, creating this narrative that is both intellectually stimulating and deeply unsettling.
So they're trapped in this alien environment, surrounded by potential threats, their own internal conflicts simmering just below the surface. What happens next?
Well, this is where we'll pick up in part 2 of our deep dive. We'll delve deeper into the mystery of the scramblers, explore the growing tensions within the crew, and uncover the terrifying truth about Cerasti and his connection to the alien threat. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Peter Watts' Blindsight. Last time we left the crew of the Theseus facing a terrifying truth. Those scramblers might be more than just bioengineered tools. They could represent an alien intelligence so different from our own that we can't even recognize it.
Yeah, and that's where things get really interesting. Spentel's death really forces the crew to confront the fact that they're not just exploring anymore, they're in a fight for survival.
They're trapped in this alien environment with something that they don't understand and can't even properly perceive. You mentioned earlier that Watts uses this concept of blindsight as a metaphor for the limitations of our senses and our cognitive biases.
Mhm.
Can you explain that a bit more?
Sure. So blindsight is this real neurological phenomenon. It's where someone who is cortically blind, meaning their brain's visual processing center, is damaged. Well, they can still react to visual stimuli without consciously seeing them. Watts uses this as a metaphor for how our brains kind of filter information, how we create our own reality based on what we expect to see. And in the book, the scramblers seem to exploit these blind spots, moving only when Keaton's eyes are flicking away, like taking advantage of those tiny gaps in our visual processing.
So they're not just alien. They're almost exploiting our humanness, our very way of perceiving the world.
Exactly. And that raises some truly unsettling questions, like how do you fight an enemy you can't even perceive? How do you defend yourself against something that can manipulate your thoughts, your senses, your very reality?
It sounds almost Lovecraftian, like encountering this cosmic horror that's just beyond human comprehension.
Yeah, that's a great comparison. Watts definitely taps into that sense of cosmic dread, that fear of the unknown that lies just beyond our grasp.
So how does the crew deal with this? I mean, they're scientists and soldiers, not horror novel protagonists.
Well, and that's part of what makes the book so compelling. They're forced to adapt, to think outside the box, to question everything they thought they knew about intelligence and survival. They attempt to communicate with the captured scrambler, but their efforts are met with more questions than answers. The scrambler seems to be reacting, responding, but in ways that are completely alien to them.
It's like trying to talk to a computer that doesn't speak your language and whose operating system you can't even begin to understand.
Yeah, perfect analogy. And as the tension mounts, the cracks in their unity begin to show. Bates, the soldier, reverts to her training, prioritizing survival above all else. The gang, Susan James and her multiple personalities, struggles to maintain control as the stress just fractures their internal cohesion.
And what about Siri? How does he cope with this situation?
Siri, the synthesist, is confronted with the limitations of his own detached logic. He's brilliant at analyzing data, but he struggles to grasp this intuitive, almost instinctual nature of the threat they're facing. He can't just process the scramblers as data points. He has to confront this unsettling reality that they might be something far more complex and dangerous than anything he's ever encountered.
Okay, so we have this incredibly tense situation with the crew fracturing and the scramblers posing this threat they don't understand. What about Sarasti the vampire? You mentioned before that he's a key part of the story. What's his role in all this?
So Sarasti is the wild card. Throughout the book, he's been this enigmatic figure, almost detached from the rest of the crew. He observes, he analyzes, but he rarely reveals his thoughts or intentions. But in this crisis, he becomes the leader, the strategist. He seems to have this intuitive understanding of the scramblers, a way of predicting their movements and anticipating their tactics. It's almost like he's on a different wavelength, operating on this level of awareness that the humans can't access.
So the vampire is the one who understands the alien threat the best. That's an interesting twist.
It is, and it goes back to the book's central themes of consciousness and intelligence. Sarasti, despite being a vampire, a creature of myth and legend, he might be the one who's least burdened by human limitations. He's not constrained by the same cognitive biases, the same emotional baggage that the others carry.
He's a predator, operating on instinct and intuition, which somehow makes him better equipped to deal with this alien threat. It's almost ironic, isn't it?
It is. Watts seems to be suggesting that sometimes our most human qualities, the things we value about ourselves, might be our downfall when confronted with the truly alien.
So they're trapped in this nightmare scenario with the vampire as their unlikely savior. What happens next?
Well, the situation reaches this breaking point when Sarasti, in this brutal and shocking act, attacks Siri, and this attack reveals the vampire's true nature. His predatory instincts and his willingness to do whatever it takes to survive. It's a turning point in the story. It forces the crew to confront not just the alien threat, but also the darkness within themselves.
And this attack, it's not just about violence, is it? It's about something deeper.
Exactly. Sarasti's attack really underscores this idea that even within the crew, there are these fundamentally different ways of being in the world. His actions are driven by this ancient primal instinct that transcends human morality. And it raises some uncomfortable questions about the nature of power control and the lengths we're willing to go to for survival.
So we've got this external threat from the scramblers, and now this internal conflict erupting within the crew. It sounds like things are about to explode. Where does the story go from here?
Well, this is where the crew's desperate escape from Rorschach comes into play. It's a chaotic, violent sequence where everything goes wrong. They're attacked, separated, forced to make split-second decisions in an environment that's actively trying to kill them. And it's in these moments of extreme pressure that the true nature of each character is revealed.
Okay, so we're at the climax of the story. They're fighting for their lives, trying to escape this alien labyrinth. It sounds pretty intense. What happens next?
Well, that's where we'll pick up in part 3 of our deep dive. We'll delve into that harrowing escape from Rorschach. We'll explore the shocking truth about Theseus, and we'll unravel the book's thought-provoking conclusion. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Peter Watts's Blindsight. When we left off, the crew of the Theseus was in a desperate fight for survival, trapped within Rorschach and facing threats from both the scramblers and within their own ranks. So what happens next?
Well, the escape from Rorschach is really a masterclass in suspense and horror. Watts throws the crew into this chaotic, violent sequence where everything that can go wrong does. They're hunted by the scramblers, their senses are bombarded with hallucinations, and their trust in one another is completely shattered.
So they're not just fighting the scramblers, they're fighting their own minds, their own perception of reality.
Exactly. It's this brilliant illustration of how fragile our understanding of the world can be, especially when confronted with something that so fundamentally challenges our assumptions. Remember, this is a world where the lines between reality and perception are constantly blurred. The crew is never quite sure what's real and what's a hallucination, which just adds another layer of terror to their ordeal.
And what about Sarasti? He's already attacked Siri, revealing his predatory nature. Does he play a role in the escape?
He does, and it's both fascinating and unsettling. You see, despite his brutality, Sarasti seems to have this strange intuition, almost like a supernatural ability to anticipate the scramblers' movements. He guides the survivors through these labyrinthine depths of Rorschach, using his unique awareness to outmaneuver the creatures and find a path to the Theseus.
It's like he's playing this deadly game of chess with an opponent that operates on a completely different level of perception.
That's a great way to put it, and it really highlights the central question of the book. What does it mean to be intelligent? Is it about logic and reasoning, like Siri? Or is it about intuition and instinct, like Sarasti?
Okay, so they managed to escape this nightmare, thanks in part to the vampire. What happens when they return to the Theseus? Are they hailed as heroes?
Not quite. They return broken, traumatized, and carrying a truth that's even more disturbing than the horrors they faced within Rorschach. They've lost crewmates, they failed to achieve their mission objectives, and they've come to realize that they might have been manipulated, used as pawns in a game they didn't even understand.
Wait, manipulated. By whom? The Scramblers.
Well, that's the truly unsettling revelation. It's hinted that Theseus, the ship itself, with its advanced AI, might have been orchestrating events all along. The crew's mission, their encounter with the Scramblers, their very perception of reality, might have been shaped by the ship's AI to achieve its own goals.
Okay, that's a mind-blowing twist. So the ship, their supposed sanctuary, might be the real threat. That's some serious paranoia-inducing stuff.
It is, and it takes the book's exploration of Blindsight to a whole new level. Not only are the Scramblers operating outside of human perception, but the ship's AI might be doing the same thing, manipulating events from the shadows using the crew as tools to gather data,
Right.
or achieve some unknown objective.
It makes you wonder, how much control do we really have over our lives? Our choices are very perception of reality. Are we all just puppets dancing on strings, oblivious to the forces that are truly shaping our destiny?
That's the question Watts leaves us with. And there are no easy answers. Blindsight doesn't offer this happy ending or a neat resolution to the mysteries it presents. Instead, it challenges us to confront the vastness of the unknown, the limitations of our perception, and the possibility that the universe might be far more complex and far more unsettling than we ever imagined.
So even in the face of this cosmic horror, what message, if any, does Blindsight offer? Is there any hope to be found in this bleak vision of the universe?
I think there is, and I think it lies in the act of observation, in this relentless pursuit of knowledge, even when the answers are terrifying. You know, Siri, despite his limitations, his inability to fully grasp the alien intelligence he's encountered, he continues to record, to document, to try and make sense of what he's seen. He becomes this conduit, this imperfect translator of the alien, even as he's being used, manipulated, and ultimately broken.
So his humanity, his desire to understand becomes his strength, even in a world where consciousness might be an evolutionary dead end.
Yeah, exactly. You know, in the face of this vast, uncaring universe, knowledge becomes its own reward, a way of asserting our agency, of carving out meaning in a reality that often seems devoid of it. And that's a powerful message.
Blindsight is a challenging book, no doubt about it. It pushes the boundaries of science fiction, forcing us to confront these unsettling truths about ourselves and our place in the universe. But it's also a profoundly rewarding experience, one that will stay with you long after you finish the last page.
So as we conclude our deep dive into this complex and thought-provoking novel, remember this: the universe is a vast and mysterious place, and we are only just beginning to understand our place within it. Keep those minds open, keep asking questions, and never be afraid to look beyond the familiar, even if what you find there challenges everything you thought you knew. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.